Today I will be uncovering the phenomenon known as Kenji Hakari, the man who Yuta Okkotsu, one of the only 4 special grade sorcerers, said was even stronger than he is. And I will get into what would have happened if Hakari decided to help the Jujutsu Society and go to Shibuya during the incident. First, I want to say if you enjoy Jujutsu Kaisen content, then you should subscribe, as I'll be posting weekly videos on different topics that you guys recommend me and a few of my own. Now that that's covered, let's get into the video. Hakari runs an underground fight club called the Gojinko Fight Club Tournament. Here he holds fights, some staged but some true fights. He does this in order to get a buzz, or what he calls the fever. Hakari calls the fever taking risk, like gambling, which you will see becomes a very important factor in Hakari's character. When talking to Tengen, Yuta says that Megumi and Yuji should go to talk to Hakari. And when they ask who he is, Yuta says that Hakari is moody, but when he gets worked up, he is stronger than he is. Maki says this isn't true, but honestly, who is Maki to tell Yuta who is stronger than him or not? Yuta would know best his own strength and who he is stronger than. We then see Yuji and Megumi go to find Hakari, and Hakari ends up beating up Yuji because he thinks something fishy is going on. While hitting him, Yuji says that no matter how much strength Hakari puts behind his punches, it feels like he is being hit with a serrated bat. After cutting a deal with Yuji and Megumi, we skip to everyone entering the Culling Games. Upon entering, we see Panda come across a sorcerer from 400 years ago called Kashimo. Kashimo says he is looking for Sukuna so he can fight him. Panda gets beaten up extremely quickly and brutally, and here we learn that Kashimo has electric attacks that fly through the air and cannot miss. His curse energy is also in a constant state of electricity, so his physical attacks are impossible to defend against. We also learn in a flashback that Kashimo was probably the strongest sorcerer alive back in his day. As an old man, we see Kashimo around a bunch of dead bodies, asking Kenjaku who he thinks the strongest sorcerer is who ever existed, to which Kenjaku responds, Sukuna. Kenjaku then tells him that there is a sorcerer around that he could fight, that being Ryu Ishigori, and Kashimo declines, saying that the fight seems dubious. We know that Ishigori is around special grade levels in terms of strength, boasting the highest curse energy output in history, along with being able to physically fight on par with Yuta, who is one of the only 4 special grade sorcerers in modern times. Even someone of this caliber, Kashimo did not find interesting. To be fair to both parties, they were both old men when this fight was being thought of, but we see in present day the difference in their strength, and I'm going to get into a fight that displays this best, Hakari versus Kashimo. Hakari is able to send Kashimo flying with a punch that sends him through crates. We then see that they get into an exchange of blows. Kashimo says that his electricity trait barely affects Hakari. This is because of the sheer amount of curse energy protecting Hakari's body. As Kashimo thinks he is beating down Hakari, he gets up and punches him so hard that he gets sent flying again. After recovering himself, Kashimo sends a lightning strike at Hakari's arm that blows it off completely. Kashimo expects this to be enough to finish him off, but after pursuing him, Hakari just comes and kicks Kashimo, sending him backwards. Hakari has an ability to fight while missing an entire limb, because he knows it will just grow back seconds later. After this, Hakari opens a domain expansion. His domain results in a gamble, and succeeding in the game results in infinite curse energy supply and automatic reverse curse technique. By the way, there is a misconception I have seen a bit about what it means when the manga says Hakari gets an infinite amount of curse energy. They mean infinite supply and not output. Curse energy output is like a blast we see in Ryu Ishigori, who has the highest output of all the players. Think of it like this. Hakari cannot literally possess an infinite amount of curse energy in his body at any given time, as his body is a finite size of about 6 feet tall. Instead, his supply of curse energy goes up and never runs out, which results in what can be called an infinite amount of cursed energy, because his body will keep regenerating and never run out of curse energy for an entire 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He can also continue to open domains over and over as long as he keeps hitting the jackpot. He goes on to exchange blows with Kashimo, even being hit with a near fatal blow to the side, but he opens the domain and hits the jackpot anyway, resulting in his body being fully healed. The fight goes into the sea, where Hakari is able to once again dodge death by removing toxins from his head manually using reverse curse technique. He makes a binding vow in order to win the fight. This was the first high-level fight with an opponent around special grade level, and he won. When looking at his abilities, he has a sliding doors that we see used against Yuji, a curse energy that has an edge, so every time he hits you it feels like you are being hit with a serrated bat, a domain expansion that grants infinite curse energy and automatic reverse curse technique. Now that his major abilities are covered, let's get into what would have happened if he decided to go to Shibuya. The first thing I will cover is what would have happened if Hakari fought alongside Gojo against the disaster curses, and would Gojo have gotten sealed? Then I will explain if instead of Hakari showing up at this moment, what if he showed up a little bit later after Gojo had already been sealed and joined the fight at the same time as Yuji and the others. Now that that's covered, let's get into what would have happened if Gojo had Hakari fighting by his side. First, I have to say this. None of the disaster curses posed a threat to Gojo. He was able to fight against all of them swiftly, and he even opened a domain that left all of them stunned. With that being said, none of the disaster curses or Choso are near Hakari level in strength, as I covered earlier. So Hakari should be able to just fight a few of them while Gojo handles the others. Or even if that does not happen, he can just lend support while Gojo does his own thing. We also know that Kenjaku says that Gojo is best when he is alone in his element because other people, no matter who they are, just get in his way. This does not matter here. Kenjaku means this in the sense that Gojo cannot use his big attacks that might hit innocent bystanders or teammates, so it's better that Gojo goes on missions or fights alone. But in the scenario Gojo is in, he is already limited to the attacks he can use because of the amount of people around, so Hakari would not be in Gojo's way. He would rather be support for the sticky situation Gojo is already in. Remember when Gojo opened a domain and stunned everyone in place? If Hakari was with him, he could have just did what he did with Yuji and touch Hakari while opening his domain so it doesn't affect him. But honestly, it shouldn't even come down to Gojo needing a domain in the first place. Now, after Gojo opens domain, this is where Kenjaku comes in with his plan, that being the prison realm to capture Gojo. Now this is very important because we are faced with two outcomes. Outcome number 1, upon seeing the arrival of Hakari, Kenjaku simply backs out. This is the most likely outcome, as another player on the field like Hakari, especially being as strong as he is, would be in Kenjaku's way. It would be extremely risky for Kenjaku to step forward and risk his life in a fight. And that brings us to outcome number 2. Outcome 2 is Kenjaku risking it anyways, and hoping he can stun Gojo by showing him that his old friend is still alive. But here's the problem with that. Hakari would also be surprised at seeing Geto alive, but it's possible that either Hakari or Gojo can knock themselves out of it. They can realize that something fishy is going on and just fight and kill Kenjaku together. Now the other outcome of this is if the prison realm latches onto Gojo and we get the scene where Gojo is stuck and is looking up at Kenjaku. This outcome is still extremely risky because it would put Hakari into fight mode and lead into a fight between Kenjaku and Hakari. Now keep in mind, Hakari has two options. He can either fight and try killing Kenjaku, or he can just fight Kenjaku long enough to where Kenjaku is convinced he can't win the fight and he just runs away. We know Kenjaku will not fully risk his life, so if he views his life as in imminent danger, he will run away. Now as for what would happen if they fought, this is a bit tricky. If Hakari and Kenjaku have a domain clash, it actually isn't obvious who would win. Domain expansions are barrier techniques, and Tengen says that the only person who can match him in barrier techniques is Kenjaku. So with this in mind, you might believe Kenjaku would win a domain clash, but there is an argument to be made for Hakari either winning or tying the domain clash. This is because of how strong Hakari's domain is in tug-of-war battles. Just so you know what I'm talking about, there was a translation about Hakari's domain during the Kashimo fight that was widely discussed on Twitter. This scan that talks about Hakari's domain is supposed to say that his domain would reign supreme in domain tug-of-wars. I don't know why Viz edited this out, but Viz has made translation mistakes in the past that had to be fixed later, so it makes sense for them to have messed up this translation as well. So with this in mind, if the way Hakari's domain is set up to win in domain tug-of-wars, then it is very possible that even though Kenjaku is a master of barrier techniques, Hakari could tie or win the domain clash. For the sake of the video, since it isn't clear, we'll just say that their domains clash and neither one wins and it comes down to a physical fight. Now from what I talked about earlier with the fight against Kashimo, Hakari is extremely powerful. His attack should be able to damage Kenjaku, and even if they won't be enough to kill him, it may just be enough to convince Kenjaku that he is a big enough threat and run away. The major problem Hakari would face is Kenjaku's gravity manipulation technique. For a 6-second interval, anything within 2 to 3 meters from Kenjaku gets forced to the ground. Now here's the problem, and it isn't clear. If you think this curse technique is powerful enough to hold Hakari down, then Hakari would probably lose the fight, as he would be in an extremely vulnerable position. But if you think the gravity technique won't be enough to hold Hakari down, then he won't have a problem. We also know that the curses Kenjaku fights with aren't even worth Hakari's trouble. The curses are useless against Yuki Tsukumo, another special grade sorcerer, because the curses Kenjaku uses are all grade 1 level. Now here's another thing, Hakari is very smart. So if he can realize what Kenjaku's curse technique is like Yuki does, then he can just attack Kenjaku in between the interval of the gravity technique and beat him down. The reason this doesn't work for Yuki in her fight with Kenjaku is because she was already very weak and was attacking with her guard down by the time that this point in the fight came. As for Hakari, it is very possible he can attack in between the gravity intervals and beat Kenjaku to death. So now that I've covered domain clashes, different outcomes and such, I will say which two outcomes I believe would happen if Hakari was with Gojo. The outcome I believe most likely is that Kenjaku will just retreat once seeing that Gojo has an accomplice that is also around special grade level and strength. The other outcome I believe would happen if Hakari actually had to fight Kenjaku is Hakari beating Kenjaku up enough to convince him his life is in danger and he runs away. And if it did come down to a life or death fight, even though I think it would be extremely close, I would give the edge to Hakari. Now that that is covered, let's get into what would have happened if Hakari showed up much later than this. What if Hakari showed up after Gojo had already gotten sealed and he came to Shibuya at the same time Yuji first entered the barrier? The first major fight that happens and Hakari will be a part of is Yuji versus Choso. Now this fight is not even close. On their own, we see Yuji and Choso around the same level in strength. Their blows hurt each other and they can keep up with each other in terms of speed. Now let's say Hakari was there with Yuji instead, and both of them are going to fight Choso. This fight would end very quickly. Hakari is on a completely different level than Choso entirely. Remember when I said Yuji was hurt so bad by Hakari's punches that he felt like a serrated bat was hitting him? Yeah, that was back when Yuji was much stronger than he is here. This weaker version of Yuji was able to go back and forth with Choso, and even the stronger Yuji was nothing in comparison to Hakari. Choso even says that only 3 punches from Yuji was enough to do extreme damage to his arm. If this is the case, then honestly only 1 punch from Hakari should put Choso out completely. And if not 1 hit, then just 1 combo. Hakari's hits are far too heavy and powerful for Choso to combat. Hakari should also be faster than Choso, as Yuji thinks that Yuta will be able to kill 15-finger Sukuna, who is much stronger than Yuji is. And Yuta thinks that Hakari is even stronger than that. Hakari is also able to match Kashimo's speed, who Panda said was extremely fast. There's also an argument that Hakari can move even faster than Kashimo, as when he realizes that when his round is almost over, Kashimo says that Hakari is speeding up, and Hakari begins to beat Kashimo down. With all of this in mind, I don't even think that a jackpot is needed to take care of Choso. He and Yuji should coast past this fight easily, and Hakari can move on to the next major fight in Shibuya, which will be Dagon versus Maki, Naobito, and Nanami. Now we will have to go over this fight in 2 parts. What would have happened if Hakari was there from the start? Or what would have happened if Hakari came after Dagon had already opened his domain? First, let's talk about if Hakari was at the fight from the start. At first it seems Nanami, Naobito, and Maki can't damage Dagon. And Nanami even says it seems like Dagon has infinite HP. But after Naobito ups his speed, he is able to move around and hit Dagon so fast that he immobilizes him. Now if Hakari was there, then he should be able to hit through Dagon's defense with every punch. We know that Jogo cowers down the 15-finger Sukuna, not even being able to land a hit on him. And like I said earlier, Yuji thinks that Yuta can beat this 15-finger Sukuna. And Yuta even thinks that Hakari is stronger than this. With this in mind, Dagon submits to Jogo's level of speed by saying Naobito is really fast, around the same level of Jogo. If this is true, then Dagon is in extreme trouble with Hakari. Hakari is levels above Jogo. The reason Dagon was able to open a domain is because he was not exercised in time with Jujutsu while he was in his weakened state. If Hakari was there, jackpot or not, enough hits with curse energy would have been enough to completely exercise Dagon before he ever got a chance to open a domain. Now let's talk about if Hakari was a bit late. What if Hakari came around while Dagon had already opened up his domain? We know that Hakari would open his own domain within Dagon's and win the domain clash because of the domain tug-of-war thing that I covered earlier. With this in mind, Hakari would open his domain within Dagon's, win the domain battle, and probably hit the jackpot as he is extremely lucky. He would then proceed to beat Dagon into oblivion. Even if he does not hit a jackpot, just the act of opening his own domain and dispelling Dagon's would be enough to put Dagon in a bad position. He would be open to a beatdown once again by either Hakari himself or all 4 of these sorcerers combined. By the way, the reason I won't cover fights like Toji versus Megami or Sukuna versus Jogo is because those fights don't have anything to do with the main storyline of helping freeing Gojo. Those fights are side fights of those characters for their own personal reasons. Remember, Hakari is just here to provide help in the major fights that mean something to the main storyline of freeing Gojo. And with that being said, the next major fight he will be present for is Yuji and Todo versus Mahito. Imagine at the moment Todo pulls up to help Yuji fight, Hakari comes around the corner and is right there with him. Now this fight should be a bit more interesting because you can't really hurt Mahito unless you strike his soul directly. But even with this in mind, Mahito gets washed. Keep in mind that domain expansions neutralize curse techniques, so even someone like Satoru Gojo can be touched while inside them. As for Mahito, a domain would affect him a bit differently. Mahito keeps his body intact by reinforcing the shape of his soul to shape his body. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. Since Mahito keeps himself together through a curse technique, and domains neutralize curse techniques, then once Hakari opens a domain, Mahito will be vulnerable to all of his attacks. The curse technique he uses to protect himself will be null, and Hakari will pile on attacks until Mahito is exercised. Even when taking into account Mahito's other stats like speed, he isn't impressive, especially to someone like Hakari. I went over it earlier when talking about the Choso fight, but anybody even comparable to Yuji in stats like Mahito is, really stands no chance against Hakari. Even if Mahito tries to open a domain, like I went over earlier, not only is Hakari's domain faster than his, but Hakari's domain would also not lose in a domain clash, so Mahito would lose this fight very quickly. That is the last major fight of the Shibuya arc that has anything to do with the main storyline of saving Gojo. Fights like Yuji vs Yuta have nothing to do with saving Gojo, and Yuta was there to save Yuji anyway, so there's no reason to even go over that fight. With that being said, after everything we covered, if Hakari had decided to enter Shibuya, he would have wreaked havoc. He would have helped the main cast win each of their individual fights, and if he was there with Gojo, he probably would have saved Gojo from being sealed. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, subscribe as I will be posting more Jujutsu Kaisen content weekly. And if you have any feedback, let me know. Thanks. See you next time.